What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're looking at 10 FPL tips to try and get you a higher rank. So I think the best thing to do, especially if you've played before, is just try and better the rank from the previous season. So if you finished 250k, maybe try and get inside the top 200k. If you finished 100k, maybe try and get inside the top 75k, and just have that little bit of an aim every season. If it goes even better, happy days, right? So looking at mine, a lot of people in pre-season have asked me what my rank is. It's written in the description, by the way, of every single video. If you want to go and check it out, it's got all the previous seasons. So last year I got 1,294th, which is pretty decent. My best ever rank. Happy to do that when there's so many FPL managers playing these days. So aside from 3 seasons, all my ranks have been within the top 22k, right? So there's 21,000. You can see it all on screen. I don't need to read through them all. So it's not elite. There's plenty of FPL managers that got better ranks than me, but it's also pretty decent, right? So I'm hoping to build on that and maybe try and get a top 1k finish, which is going to be difficult. But given that last season was my best rank, I've taken some things that I kind of applied last year, and I'm going to talk about them in this video. So 10 tips to go through. Give it a like if you enjoy it. Hit that subscribe button. And let's quickly talk about Fantasy Football Scout. So here's a little tip before we get into the 10 main tips, right? Make sure you check out Fantasy Football Scout. There is a link in the description below. Again, there's still 20% off at the time of recording, so you can sign up for 1 year and just pay outright, or you can pay monthly as well. So there's loads of good ways to do it. It's really cheap for a whole season of FPL content. There's extra members articles. There's loads of tools on the sidebar which you can use and get used to using. They're also overhauling the design as well as I speak, so it's worth keeping an eye out on that as well. But still get signed up because the old design is still decent. So you've got loads of things. Season ticker, you can amend this, right? So you've probably seen me use it before. You can go to 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, as many as you want. You can make it as small as you want. So if you're looking for a player for a specific period of time, you can do that. You can order it by attack, by defense, best fixtures, worst fixtures, so you can see who to go for, who to avoid. So that's one really good thing. You got a rate my team tool, so you can have a look at players who's projected to get the most points over a certain period of time. This is for 6 game weeks. You can make it longer, you can make it shorter, etc. And you can also build a team and see what kind of projected points you get over, maybe the first 6 game weeks. And then you can amend that, put a different player in and see if the number goes up, right? Just to get an idea of who the best players might be. You can build custom stats tables if you want to check out expected data, shots in the box, chances created, whatever it might be. Fantasy Football Scout has it all. This is pretty much where I get all my stuff from. The season ticker and the Rate My Team tool in particular are really helpful throughout the season. So if you want to sign up, link in the description below, still 20% off. Give it a go and get signed up now. So one thing I did last year was made a concerted effort to learn more about stats and use them more. So I asked a lot of questions to a lot of people about which stats to use, how to use them, what kind of sample sizes to use and stuff like that. And it really helped me. Now, obviously, just because I got a high rank last year does not mean I'll necessarily get one this year, but I'm hoping that it can at least get me into those higher levels, right? One thing with stats is they're objective. As long as you use the same stats for every single comparison, or, if you're looking at a bunch of players, use the same stats for all of them, then it's objective, right? It's just data that's been collected. It's not you having a bias against a player or you thinking that a player is better because you've seen them play more and stuff like that. So it can be objective. And I think it's important not to, there's loads of people out there who are like, nah, it's all about the eye test. I watch a lot of football. I know more than you, etc. That's absolutely fine. But you can do both. You can watch football and you can use data. And I do think it would improve a lot of FPL managers if they incorporated it a little bit more. Definitely don't cherry pick. So sometimes you'll see a person wants to pick a certain player or they want to make a case for a certain player and they'll go and find the stats to do that. That's definitely not the way to do it. You should start looking at the stats and see who jumps out of the data from there. And also, don't try and go and look for every single stat going, right? If you go into the Fantasy Football Scout members area and you look through every single different stat, that's probably going to give you a headache. You should narrow down the ones you use. And once you start using certain ones at the start of the season, keep using them throughout because at least then it stays the same. Personally, I like to use expected data because it pretty much incorporates everything else anyway. So expected goals, when something like that's used, then it will take into account whether the shot was close to goal or not. So that's like shots in the box or shots outside the box. Whether, how hard the shot was, how difficult it was, what position in front of goal it was. Was it a narrow angle? Was it right in front of goal, etc.? All those things are kind of taken into account. So I'm not saying you have to just use stats, but I do think it can be useful to use them. And yeah, don't use everyone and definitely don't cherry pick. I see that all the time. I want to get this player. Let me go and find some stats that prove it. You want to be using the same ones kind of the whole way through. And when you look at a sample of kind of 5 5 to 6 players, make sure you use the same stats to compare them. Don't use one for one and then another for another. Okay, so limit the number of opinions, right? So this is the amount of opinions you get from someone else about a player or about your squad or about a transfer you're going to make or about a captaincy. The more opinions you get, the more noise you're likely to get. Now, sometimes you'll ask a question and everybody will come back with the same opinion. That's kind of helpful, right? At least, especially if you were already thinking of going for that player or going for that transfer, the captaincy, whatever, that kind of helps because everyone else is also saying the same thing. But often, right, especially in pre-season, if I go and put my draft out there, like you see my comment section when I put a draft video out, like this is my updated draft, this is who I've picked, there'll be loads of opinions, and that's great. I like listening to opinions, but I also take into account that everyone's got their own thoughts on a player. They've maybe used different stats, maybe they've watched them more, watched them less, whatever it might be. Maybe I've picked them for a reason they don't agree with, and that's fine. But if I listen to every single one that came in, I'd constantly be making changes. Like if I'm on a stream, for example, and I say, well, I'll swap this player for this player, I'll get a comment straight away in the chat, no, it should be this one. So I'll put that one in instead. No, it should be this one instead. So you should really limit the amount of opinions, in my opinion, that you get when you've got a question, right? Go and get people you trust. If there's someone that you trust in the FPL community, whether it's a friend, someone you follow on Twitter, try and get their opinion more often. Maybe send a message to someone rather than putting it out publicly where you're going to get a lot of noise, right? And also, don't be afraid. This kind of comes in with the stats, right? Because it's kind of similar, but don't be afraid to use an FPL model like Rate My Team in the Fantasy Football Scout members area. If you're really undecided on an option, and when you ask people, you're just getting both sides to the story, right? So you're asking to pick between two players and you've got like 51% are saying player A, 49% are saying player B, and you genuinely can't split it. Don't be afraid to go and use something like the Rate My Team tool and see which it picks as the highest player, and maybe just go with that, because at least then you're kind of taking that decision out of your hands, because sometimes you will get cases where there really is hardly anything between the player and you just need to make a decision, because it's those kind of queries or those kind of player decisions that you've got to make that can really give you a headache when it's that close. So definitely limit the number of opinions. Like if I really want to know, I'll go and ask someone on Twitter, but I'll probably just send them a message, right? Rather than, because if I put it out publicly, it's great that I get loads of opinions, but it's hard to filter through which ones to kind of trust and whether the opinion is, you know, not one that I trust necessarily, but that's been thought about a lot. Maybe it's just because they want to make my team like their team. So yeah, definitely limit the number of opinions and try and cut down the noise if you can. Okay, so I would definitely question the FPL FDR, right? So that's the fixture difficulty rating. So when you go onto a player, you look at their fixtures, there's an FDR number next to it, right? So it'll have a number like 3, they never put 1, I don't understand that, to be honest, but 3, 2, 4, and I think sometimes you get 5 as well, and then they'll be color coded. But one thing, I'm not quite sure what they're using to make those numbers. Are they just using clean sheets? Are they using stats? If so, which stats are they using? I also don't know how often it gets updated. So you need to kind of, in your mind essentially, or maybe even write it down, update as the season goes on, because a team might be looking better defensively or worse defensively than the numbers suggest, right? So like I'm looking at it here for Man United. Now obviously Man United's quite a good team, so you wouldn't expect too many teams to necessarily trouble them. But Man City's a 4, and so is Spurs. To me, that's just not correct. Spurs is a difficult team, but I think Man City are a step above. So that's the kind of thing that I would be thinking about. And then there's loads of teams on 2. So you've got Palace, Norwich, Brentford, Brighton, and Newcastle. So I would say, yeah, if you're looking at an attacker, Palace, Norwich, Brentford, Newcastle, all good. Brighton, it's maybe a little bit more difficult. Is it on the same level as like a West Ham? Possibly not. But I think just using those numbers can be a little bit misleading. So you have to kind of look at what's happened over last season and decide who's going to be a good defence, a good attack, a bad defence, bad attack, etc. But also kind of change your opinion as the season goes on. But try and get a good amount of samples in. Like, don't, after 3 games, make a snap decision that actually this defence is awful or this defence is brilliant, because it doesn't usually happen that quickly. But I would definitely question the FDR and don't just look sea of green, sea of grey, sea of pink, or whatever it is. Specifically look at who they're playing and then make a decision from that. Okay, so this one sounds obvious, right? But I don't think people do it as much as they probably should. Maybe they do for the start of the season, but not when you go out throughout the season, right? So when we're into like game week 10, are people still planning ahead? So I use transfers to get the best captain where I can. Sometimes there will be scenarios where if it's literally getting the player for a week and then selling them again, then maybe I'll just go for the second best and just hope. But most of the time I try and get the best captain in. It's fairly straightforward because you're mostly looking for, at least I do, you're looking for no punts. So you're looking at Salah, De Bruyne, Son, Kane, Fernandes, etc. Sometimes there'll be other players you go for, but not that often, right? So I like to use transfers and I plan my captaincy ahead of time. There's a few reasons why I do that, right? One, you're not swayed by really recent events. So sometimes like I'll have decided that I'm going for a player and then because they haven't scored the week or two before, other people are just like, nah, I'm not going to go for them now. But I think, well, that player, we know how good they are. They haven't just become a bad player overnight and they've got a great fixture. They should still be in the captaincy conversation. Or it might be the other way. Maybe you've decided to go for Fernandes and then Salah scores the week before. Is that one goal they've scored against a different team, is that enough to change your decision? I don't think it should be. And the other reason I like planning ahead of time is when you get to that game week, it's taken a decision really out of your hands, unless something major has happened, right? Some people will get to, say, game week 4, and the deadline's coming soon, and then they'll look at their team, and then they'll decide who they're going to captain. But in my mind, you've already put that player in to be your captain, so therefore they should still be your captain. Again, unless anything major has happened, like a big injury, or they're a doubt, or they might not get as many minutes because they're being rested for Europe, or whatever it might be. But that's all things to consider. So definitely plan ahead of time who your captains are going to be. I really think like 4 to 6 weeks is a good barometer. Even if you don't have that player in your team, it then gives you the kind of warning to your mind that you should start looking at how you can get them in. How am I going to do that? And who am I going to sacrifice to do it? So captaincy is big, I think. Definitely plan for it. Okay, so I'm actually recording this video a little bit in advance because I don't know if I can record it on the day that I want it to go out. But I think in pre-season that's kind of fine, right? Especially for a video like this where it's just general points rather than specific player points. But interestingly, by the time this video comes out, I will have released an FPL showcase video, which is around psychology, right? And a part of it's going to be about making decisions. So it'd be interesting to see if what Ross says is similar to what I'm going to say now. And if not, just go and watch that video. It'll probably have lots of useful advice too. So this is trust yourself, right? It's not really necessarily using your gut. It's just trusting your decisions. So one thing I find is people will make a decision, right? So they'll, I don't know, have watched the games from the weekend. They'll have watched match of the day. They'll have looked at the stats, whatever it is that you use to make decisions. And they'll make a decision and then they'll spend however many more days there is to the deadline trying to disprove why that decision was bad. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Of course, you should look at every single angle, factor, whatever it might be to make your decision, at least as many as you want to use. But it does get to a point where you've looked at everything, you've made the decision, it's fine. Sometimes that decision will work, sometimes it won't. That's just FPL. And I think sometimes if you can get past the point of, you know, basically realizing that everything, once the deadline's done, once the games start, it's out of your hands, right? You can only make the best decision you can make, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't, right? Also, like I said kind of before, this goes back to the stats one, but you use similar metrics every week, whether that's watching the same amount of games or watching match of the day every week or using the same stats every week. Try and do that, right? That'll help you trust yourself. It'll also help you build towards a better, I don't know, understanding of what to use every week. You might tweak, okay, well, I used this for like 4 weeks. It didn't really work too well. I'm going to tweak slightly how I measure whether a player should come into my side, etc. But it'll help you trust yourself because you think, well, I've looked at the same thing that worked before. I'm just going to use that again and then basically hope for the best. And also, I do think it's good to, when you're making a decision, essentially, to come back a few days after the games are finished. Because if you make a decision straight away, once the games are finished, maybe you've had a poor week, I would probably say you're not making the best decision you can. So sometimes it's good just to put FPL away, maybe consume some content, maybe get some opinions around players, but don't make a snap decision on what you want to do. Come back to it a few days later and see if you're still thinking the same way. So some of these are going to intertwine with other points I've made, right? So ignoring small sample sizes kind of goes along with stats as well. It kind of also goes along with planning your captaincy in advance, that you're not then looking at maybe like 1, 2, 3 games before to make your decision, right? Because if Mo Salah doesn't score for a few games, it doesn't mean he's not going to score for the rest of the season. At some point, he's going to come into form, and you've just got to try and hope that that's when the fixtures match up, right? So form is something that I've tried to forget. Now, I will still use the word, and I don't think there's any harm in using the word, right? We all know what it means. If someone, you know, even outside of the FPL world, is talking about a footballer, and they say, Kevin De Bruyne is in form, it means they're playing well. Maybe they're creating lots of chances. Maybe if it's a defender, they're making lots of blocks, interceptions, tackles. If it's a forward, maybe they're scoring lots of goals at the time. We know what it means, right? They've been in good form. But for FPL, I don't think it massively matters. Just because a player has been scoring doesn't mean they're necessarily going to keep scoring. Like getting chances, having high expected goals, high expected assists, etc. That is usually more predictive in predicting when a player is going to start scoring, right? And obviously then you use fixtures for that as well. If a player's got like Chelsea, Man City, etc., much less likely to score. And the thing with form is people say it to me, and I'll always say, well, how do you know when form started and how do you know when it's going to stop, right? You don't really. And if you do that, then you're always waiting a few weeks for someone to score, then you're buying them, and then you're waiting for a few weeks for them to stop, and then you're selling them. And it's not necessarily the best way to make a prediction. And sometimes it doesn't work, right? Lingard last season, for example, I should have had Lingard on this slide. He kept on that form for a while, but I would still stand by the fact he probably never do that again at all in the rest of his career. How many ridiculous amount of returns he got in a few games. So I personally prefer to use stats or just like the caliber of a player. Right? We know that Son, Salah, Fernandes, these players are extremely good. And if we start noticing that from other players that maybe haven't performed like that in the past, but maybe are a bit cheaper and we can see them doing well, they've got good fixtures coming up, even if they've not been scoring goals or getting assists, if they've been playing well, that's all we really want, right? And okay, that is kind of form, but I do think for the most part, it'll be better to forget it. I also would say you've got to question fixtures and question the narrative. So questioning the narrative, right, is when you see maybe a thread on Twitter or maybe even one of my videos, right, because I'm sure I do this without realising, and they'll say something like, this player has done this much in the last 4 fixtures. Well, first of all, it shouldn't be, okay, that's great. They've done really well in the last 4. It should be, well, what did they actually do? How many shots have they had? What's their expected goals? How many shots in the box have they had, etc. But also, what fixtures did they have, right? Because that's really important. If a team has suddenly started keeping clean sheets, that's great. But if they've just played Norwich, Brentford, Watford, Newcastle, Palace, and they're about to play Liverpool, Everton, Man United, Man City, the chances are they're not going to keep those clean sheets up. So you've got to question the fixtures that have happened, right? We saw it last year. One example that sticks out in my mind is that Fulham had become this defensively good team, but recently they played easier fixtures, right? And then they didn't really keep too many clean sheets after that because the fixtures got more difficult. So you've got to question that. You've got to ignore small sample sizes, right? A defence just doesn't just suddenly become good because of 4 good fixtures. Just like if a player's scoring lots of goals, but they got tough fixtures coming up, that should tell you it's probably not going to continue. Okay, so limit the amount of money on your bench is a fairly standard one, but I do think it's important, especially in like game week 1, right? When you're making your initial squad, because you've only got 100 million to spend, just like everyone else, right? So you want to get as much money on the pitch, especially before there's like European matches and stuff like that, because players don't tend to get rotated as often. So that's worth considering. But also, it's very rare that you use all 3 outfield subs. Obviously, goalkeeper one, very rarely used. But it's very rare that you use 3 outfield subs, that you need them all to come on. So you don't necessarily need them to be of a certain price or even to all play. Like I will probably go into the season, maybe, depending on how my squad's made up, with a 4 million defender that may not even play. And I think that's fine, right? There's also lots of value in defence. So I've talked about best formations. If you're in a formation where you're playing like 3-5-2 or 3-4-3, there's lots of 4.5 million defenders that are great value, right? You don't need to be spending more than that. The reason that I've put Smith Rowe on is because he's 5.5 million. So I've seen some people think about putting him on the bench. Personally, I just wouldn't do that. I think it's just money wasted. That extra million, especially at the start of the season, can do so much more for your first 11, and it's the first 11 that's going to play most weeks. So definitely limit the amount of money. Just to give you like an idea, I will almost certainly have a 4 million goalkeeper who probably won't play. I may have a 4 million defender who may not play as well. I'll definitely try and have a 4.5 million defender, one that is definitely going to start every week. And then depending on formation, if it's a 3-4-3, then I'll have a 4.5 million player midfielder, and I'll be okay with that. So I won't look to spend too much more than that. What's that? 2 4 millions is 8, 2 4.5s is 9, so 17 million on the bench, and basically you've got 83 million then to spend on your squad. Okay, so this again is more to do with your game week 1 squad, but it could apply throughout the season as well, and that is start with known quantities, right? So I've put Werner on because last year I said that he was a known quantity and we could start with him, and obviously didn't do too well. But I would still say it doesn't just have to be a player that's done it in the Premier League before, right? If they've got stats and performances from like a lower league, maybe the Championship or a different league, Bundesliga, La Liga, etc., we should still take that into account. Just because Werner didn't hit the ground running and absolutely smash it in his first season doesn't mean that other players haven't. Look at Aubameyang when he came in a few years ago. He was great from the start. Other players have done it as well. Son's improved since he's been in the Premier League. De Bruyne has got exactly the same numbers in the Premier League as he had in the Bundesliga. So just because a player hasn't been in the Premier League doesn't make them a known quantity. But if it's a player maybe you've never heard of and you're looking at the numbers and you're not really sure about them, they're going to a team that maybe are unsettled, they're building a whole new squad, that should be someone that you question. It doesn't mean that you can't take a punt, even though I've put no punts. Really, that should be limit your punts, right, to maybe 1 or 2. But you don't want to go for too many, because if it all goes wrong, you're suddenly scrambling to get the team that everybody else started with. So I'm not going to say start with a template, because I just hate that, right? You want to buy good players. And if that means you want to go for Sancho or you want to give Werner another go, that's absolutely fine. These are players that have proven they can do it on big stages, right? Yes, maybe the Premier League is a little bit harder than the Bundesliga, but it's not like the Bundesliga is just a walkover every single week for these players. They've also played in the Champions League, in the Euros for England, Germany, or whatever it might have been in the past as well. But that's what I would do. Most of my squad is going to be made up of players that have either done it in the Premier League already or that I'm fairly confident can do it. If it's someone that I just think, well, they could do it, I hope they do it, maybe they'll do it, they're probably not players that you want too many of in your team. This is something I really tried to stick by last season, which is don't force players out of your team unless there's a good reason, right? So the first question to ask yourself is there a better option? If there isn't, even if that player's not performing in your team, you may as well just leave them in, right? So I think I remember last season, right, and I fell foul to this, okay? I didn't really, at the start of the season, I was a little bit trigger happy on my transfers to try and beat the price rises, which I don't think is a bad thing, but throughout the season you need to pay attention to this. Is there a better option? So if you've bought in a player, especially like the cheaper players, okay, so let's say you've bought in a 6.5 million attacker and you've bought them in for good reason. They've either been playing well, you think they're going to play well, or they've got good fixtures, right? So you've bought them in and they haven't scored or assisted. Maybe they got 1 assist over 5 game weeks, right? The first thought or reaction is, got to get rid of that player. I need a player that's going to get 3 to 4 attacking returns in 5 weeks. But if there's no better option out there, that's just a wasted transfer. So I think it was last season I had more pay, right? Who just wasn't performing for me, but I didn't feel like there was a better option. And every week people would say, you should have got this player, you should have got that player. And I'm looking at them saying, they've not outscored more pay in those weeks you telling me that I should have got them. I think it was Watkins at the time, right? And I'm not saying more pay is better than Watkins, but this was just last season when they were a similar price. And Watkins just wasn't scoring either. So, of course, I could have transferred more pay out and got Watkins in. But with the fixtures or whatever, I just didn't feel like that was a transfer. It didn't lose me any points by keeping more pay, but it did save me a transfer. Now, you can get trapped with keeping players for too long, but if there is a better option, then maybe you should make that swap. Do you have other fires to put out, though, as well? So, again, let's say you've got a player not performing, but someone else is doing even worse, or someone else is injured, suspended. They're obviously your first port of call. You might have to keep a player you're not that happy with for a bit longer. Sometimes a hit will be worth it, but it depends on the circumstances of that player. And obviously, will fortunes change, right? If they've had a medium-ish set of fixtures, maybe even a bad set of fixtures, have they got a good set of fixtures to come, right? Fixtures do matter. Right? Don't let anyone tell you that they don't. You know, there's no point in having a form versus fixtures debate, because it's a bit of everything, but fixtures massively matter, right? So if they've got a really good set of fixtures coming up, and again, there's not really a better option out there, just keep them. You don't have to force them out, even if they're not performing. And lastly, tip number 10, why not hit that subscribe button, right? I know I put this in a similar video last year, but I had to go for it again. Look, I've got some goals, right? By the end of the season, I'd love to hit 250,000 subscribers. It's going to be difficult, but I know we can do it together. And I'd love to hit 200,000 by game week 1, right? So there's a lot of people watching that are hopefully enjoying the content. They've watched a bunch of videos. They just haven't hit that button. So go and check right now if that's you. I will be producing content every day now until the start of the season, and then pretty much every day throughout the season as well. So there's loads more content to come. I've been doing this for, I don't know, I think it's coming on for 5 years now. So if you want to support me, if you are enjoying the content, please do hit that subscribe button. Obviously hit the notification bell as well. There's loads more content to come, and you're going to want to know when that's going live. But yeah, hit that subscribe button. Let's try and hit 200,000 by game week 1. There we go. That is it for this one. Please do give it a like if you enjoyed it and if you found it helpful. Leave a comment below as well. Let me know if you disagree with any of these. Let me know if you do things a little bit differently and what your top tips are to get a higher rank as well. So leave a a comment below. If you haven't already checked out Fantasy Football Scout, there is a link in the description, top of the description, to give that a go. It's 20% off right now. You can pay for a year, you can pay monthly. There's loads of stats, loads of custom kind of tables and tools and stuff that you can use, and they're also, you know, overhauling the design and always building towards more and more tools and loads of members articles. There's a whole host of stuff, right? So go and check it out, link in the description below. I'll leave it there. Please do subscribe if you haven't already and you're enjoying my content, and I'll catch you again tomorrow for another video.